Actually, just before I put Craig on, I'll put him on now. Craig, welcome to the show. Love to have you on again.
Hello, how are you?
Where are you today?
Boardroom in Auckland.
Boardroom in Auckland. Oh, that sounds very important.
Yeah,
Craig, I want to just pose something with you before that seems it's troubling me. I've just bought some Bluebird thinly cut, ready salted potato chips. You know the types? Well, because I quite like them.
Yes. Okay.
A Bluebird thinly cut, ready salted potato chips, and I've gone to the nutrition information at the back, and it says ingredients.
Yeah.
And I would have thought there's only one ingredient in a potato chip, and then it says potatoes 64%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm struggling, Craig, as to what the other 36% of a potato chip would be.
Salt.
What? 30? No. They've got down here sunflower oil, salt, antioxidants, extract, and citric acid. But that can't be 34% of the volume of a chip, can it?
Well, you need to preserve the chip, don't you, inside the bag. Otherwise, if it was a potato, it would slowly go brown.
I'm worried when my chip is only 64% potato. That's not my deal. Did you ever like potato chips, or have you given them up because of your healthy lifestyle?
Not really. They stick in my teeth. I don't really like them.
So
you could solve that dilemma by just eating 64% of the pack.
That would be your way. That's an economist way, isn't it? Really. That's an economist speaking. All right, yeah. Hey, listen. This week, I've been praising you all week. I don't know if you've been listening to me, but I've been praising you all week because you've been rattling on for a year now, Craig, on the financial costs of New Zealand signing up to not just the Kyoto Protocol, but I think it's Paris 2030. And now, finally, the mainstream media are catching up with you saying, and there was this article by Thomas Coughlin in the New Zealand Herald this week, saying that Treasury have been keeping off the cost of that commitment from the government accounts for years, and nobody's got an understanding as to why. Now, you've been mentioning this for a long, long time, for as long as you've been with the platform. You must feel some vindication, I would think.
How do you respond to that? No, not vindication, but very pleased that we're now talking about it more widely than just in Wellington. Just back up the truck a little bit to make sure we're all on the same page. So we signed the Paris Agreement in 2015, so the national government signed it. That agreement is for us to reduce our net greenhouse gases emissions in 2030 by 50% below gross emission levels that were prevailing in 2005. So that's our target. Now, if we don't do that domestically with our current settings, ETS and agriculture and forestry, we have the option of buying international mitigant offsets, that is European style carbon credits. And the Treasury, with the Ministry for the Environment, published a paper earlier last year, which is what I simply quoted from, which described the cost of that mitigant, which taxpayers would have to pay for, and their estimate, or at least the Ministry for the Environment's baseline projections, were between $4.2 and $23.7 billion. That was their estimates last year, and that's a big range because we don't know whether we are going to get to 2030 targets. We don't know, therefore, the volume of carbon credits in the EU system that we have to buy, and we don't know the EU price, the EU carbon price. That's why it's variable. But to keep it in perspective, that number compares with our current education budget of just over $21 billion. It's an awful lot of taxpayers' money. And if we were to debate about whether that should come from our taxpayers' pocket, you then ask the question, well, who would be paying for that? And if it was paid for out of income taxes, bear in mind that only 50% of New Zealanders actually pay income tax. So that's a very narrow definition of taxation, obviously, but just try and help people understand what that means for people's after-tax personal pay if it was taken from income tax. It's a substantial amount of money, and I'm not sure that people have thought about the trade-offs. How important is reaching this agreement compared to the costs?
I totally agree with you.
So that's a second. Then we say to your next challenge, well, why isn't this on the Crown accounts? Why isn't this more publicly available in the briefings to the incoming government, for example? And you have to go back to a cabinet paper in April 2016 that the Ministry for the Environment put up, which is the quotes. Officials advised that the 2030 target should not be reflected in the Crown accounts. You think, oh, why is that? Well, there's no current legally enforceable obligation on the Crown to expend resources to meet the target. If there's no requirement for expenditure, there's no requirement to reflect this issue in the accounts, which seems a really odd statement, doesn't it?
It does.
So the Crown's not required to expend resources, so we don't need to put it to the accounts. But to their credit, Treasury and Minister for the Environment did publish a very good paper earlier last year on the economic and fiscal assessment of climate change, etc. So they've put it out there. It is in the public domain. It just hasn't been focused on as a trade-off for us as citizens to think about.
No, it hasn't. Whose fault's that? Is that the government's or is that the media's?
Whose fault is it? Look, there should be many more eyes on this. I mean, the users of the ETS, people who are involved in emissions, taxpayers, people who have a very strong view on the benefits of climate change mitigation should be thinking about the costs of that to have a more balanced debate. So are people deliberately not talking about it? I don't think so. I just think the awareness is poor at this stage until it starts becoming much more obvious. It's going to hurt me in my back pocket.
I had a friend, one of our platform callers called in just before 12 o'clock, and he said, can you ask Craig a question, please? Because he said, I'm just an ordinary tradie, going about my business, paying my bills. And he said, what will the Paris 2030 obligations mean to me as an average Kiwi from this? How am I likely to see the effects of?
Right. Yeah, so the principal way we cope with adjusting from fossil fuels to clean non-greenhouse gas emissions is through the emissions trading scheme. And the 2020 report put out by Treasury estimates that for every $10 increase in the price of NZ carbon units under the emissions trading regime equates to $1.18 per week costs increasing for the average household. So if your caller is in that average household bracket, it's $1.18 cost every $10. Now that ETS price has risen from, I don't know the price in 2022, but let's say it was $10 then. The current price is $66. So let's just say it's 6 times. So you're now looking at a $7 cost per week at increase from an increase from $1.18 in 2022 to the price today, which is $66 per unit. So let's say $7 per week.
So that's $350 a year per average household, yeah?
Correct. And that's before this bigger picture issue around what is the cost to taxpayers of buying European carbon credits if we don't meet our own target by 2030. And bear in mind, we don't have agriculture in the system, right? We've got an ETS that's had its troubles last year and the year before with the government being taken to task by a judicial review to get it back up and running again, and then auction failures all the way through last year. So the Climate Change Commission's come out and said, our dear friend Rod Carr come out this week and said, look, there is a suspicion from the Climate Change Commission, which I find an odd word that they use. There's a suspicion that there's too many units in the system, which is depressing the price. So they're recommending that the government reduce the number of units available, which would push the price up. So the Climate Change Commission is clearly concerned that a price pass or the increased costs of units is not happening quickly enough. So I'm not sure how the Climate Change Minister and the Cabinet's going to respond to that, but they're clearly concerned that a trajectory to $175, which was in one of their kind of scenarios, is not happening, and because there's too many units. And I would argue, well, that's because you just have to plant a tree or a forest, and then you can sell units into the scheme, which is depressing the price. And we're one of the only country in the world, I think, that has forestry as an offset to its scheme, which is creating the depressed price, I suspect. So there we go. Hope that helps the tradie caller.
Well, okay. So if I take it, then where does that money go? So the $350 a year that my tradie pool is paying, who gets that money?
Well, these are the group of emitters that have to pay for those units. So they face increasing, unless they reduce their emissions, they face higher costs, pollution costs, and they have to pass those costs on to consumers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
What Treasury's trying to do is estimate the impact on goods and services, so transport costs, airline costs.
Yeah.
Your chips, your bluebird chips, how much of that increase in the price that you're seeing today in your bluebird lightly salted non-oil, good quality chips comes from having to pay for pollution costs via the ETS.
Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so it's passed on. The cost from the emitters is passed on to me, the consumer. I'm paying as a consequence.
Yep.
Gotcha.